Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette. We're so glad you're with us. A very special guest, Mr. William Bill Blackwell. Hello,
Hi.
Mr. Blackwell.
Hello there.
You were a technician on the
Everything from technician to supervisor.
on the early days. That's why we have Cape Canaveral there. We've
Yeah.
got your daughter, Cindy Parker, here. Cindy, hand me that notebook that's beside you. We've recorded this show so we can bring you this special guest here. We're going to talk to Mr. Bill Blackwell about such rockets as the Thor rocket and the Centaur. That was the second most important second stage maybe in the history of rocketry.
It was first it was the Atlas, then the Thor, then the Mercury, then the Agena on that.
Right, and then you ended up with the Polaris.
Yeah, the Polaris is what I ended up retiring with.
Right. Well, we're going to talk about the spectrum of his career over 40 years at this rocket ranch here behind me here on our green screen. Marty Winkel's here running the board, and we hope that you enjoy this recorded program, but you can still make comments as we will reply to your comments on our YouTube channel on there. To set the stage with Mr. Blackwell here, you were born in 1933. You were a teenager at the end of World War II. Tell us, where did you grow up? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And how did you get into the rocket business?
Well, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. And then when I went in the Navy, when I got out of the Navy, I was in San Diego. I just got married. And so I stayed out there and went to trade school and went to work for Convair on the Atlas. And when the first Atlas was ready to come to the Cape, I told the wife we were time to go home. And so we came back to Florida and came to Titusville, and we've been here ever since. So.
Yes, your daughter Cindy here has lived in Cindy Parker. Glad that she contacted us because we love talking to our national treasures, and we truly believe here at the American Space Museum you are that. We celebrate the birth of the space age right here on this rocket ranch behind me, and you are truly one of the godfathers in about our American space program. But it all didn't start with satellites, right? This was a nuclear warhead facility.
It started out, it was basically all, we were all ABMA before NASA, and it was, all the missiles out here were either Army or Navy or, they were all weapons grade type missiles.
Yeah, and our younger viewers out there, as we look at the launch pads there, the famous Space Coast, how they were built up, like behind me. Can't ignore the fact that this is what this was all about. We built this because we feared a nuclear attack from Russia. The proliferation was amazing. What was it like to live and work with this?
It was a lot more secretive, you might say. In other words, security was a lot more than it is now. And it was... you had to really watch what you said, what you were happening and what you were doing, but it was still a lot of fun.
It's still a lot of fun. But did you think something like this was going to happen? I mean, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis.
It happened so gradually that nobody really, it just, one thing kind of led into another. When the Russians and the U.S. were going back and forth to see who could get the first satellite and all that was, you kind of took it for granted that, okay, next on the list will be a such and such, and so you went into it. But it was, like I say, everything just gradually evolved.
Mm-hmm. You had security clearance all your life, it sounds like, of your career there.
Yeah.
So that's something to be entrusted with. But what was it like to grow up post World War II? And the world changed so much, it seemed overnight to me, reading about it. Did it appear like that to you too, sir?
Yes, it was a completely different, everything had changed with the war, so growing up was quite a bit different. Going to school, you were basically about the same, but you were learning different subjects that you normally didn't take before. And uh, I went to military school when I was at the 7th grade on, and then went back to high school in the 11th grade. But it was it was basically growing up was about the same as it had been, all except it was just more complicated.
Well, Jacksonville, where you grew up, an important port
Yeah.
in America, like San Diego, where you ended up going also.
Yeah. Well, my father was built bridges, and he had come down and had done since the 20s through the southeast, and we ended up staying in Jacksonville. He had his permanent yard there and everything,
Uh-huh.
so that's why I ended up growing up there. And then we started to go. They're originally from Canada, so we went back up there for about a year or so when I was in the 1st grade.
Mm-hmm.
And he was thinking about moving his business back there, and then the war came along, and so he came back, stayed here. So it was a great place to grow up. Really, it was.
Cool.
Jacksonville was a good place.
When's the last time you were back there?
Uh,
To tell us how much has changed.
the last time I was back there, I kept getting lost because every time I'd try to go somewhere, I'd end up at an interstate that had been built
Right.
across there. But
It is a slick 95 they built through there over the last few years I've been coming down here. It's
Yeah.
a beautiful city, though, from
well,
the
and
skyscrapers.
we had been going back quite a bit because my wife was from Jacksonville, and so her folks were up there, and so my folks were up there, so we would made a lot of trips.
Were you beach people? Did you enjoy the
Yeah,
beach
my
a
mother
lot?
ended up living at the beach there, so yeah, Jacksonville Beach was a place to go back then. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, all right. I'm sure you had some fun there. Well, we're going to talk. I want to hear some stories about Cape Canaveral in the early days when you came down here in the late 50s by way of kind of introducing that. Here's a Don McKay Merry Christmas card from the 60s where we've landed on the moon. Over your shoulder is a bunch of moon men coming out. And as I make that smaller, you see the little moon men on the right-hand side there. We were going to the moon, and it was sort of just like everybody. It just took over pop culture and people's mindset. But tell us about those early days.
Well, it was kind of a slow graduation. We kept back in the 50s and the 60s. Everybody kept changing companies because it was a real fluid population down there. People were here for a year or two on a program, and then they'd go back to California or wherever. And now it's kind of settled down with SpaceX and everything. People are more of a permanent type. But back then, like I worked for Convair and Douglas, and then McDonald, and finally ended up with Lockheed was the first place I ever stayed at really for a long time. And
were you one of these space workers that worked for these different companies, but they never left their desk, the same desk? The name on the check just changed?
Well, actually,
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'd actually moved to different companies. Well, a couple of times I left the Cape. Like a friend of mine we went into business one time building models, and it lasted about 4 or 5 months. Then we came back real quick. But it was, you'd actually change because we were working on the floor, actually, physically working on the missile rather than paperwork type.
Well, we're talking with Mr. Bill Blackwell here. He is an instrumentation technician for over 40 years.
Yeah.
At the Cape Canaveral here, the Rocket Ranch, as we lovingly call it. We have so many friends that have been part of the unmanned program. I remember Murphy Wardman, who's 93, when I first met him, saying, "You don't want to talk to me. I didn't launch any people into space." You know, and I said, "Murphy, yeah, I do. I want to learn all about these unmanned programs." Did you kind of feel that rivalry?
Not really. It was, well, Lockheed was covering both. When I was with the first 10 years with Lockheed, I was on the Agena. And that was more, we were with Gemini and all that. But And then it was the last 10 years I was on the Polaris type with the submarines, and it was not really any difference between the two. It was, we had people that were transferring back and forth, and
Well, we're going to spur some memories. And Marty and I took you around the museum here with your daughter, Cindy. We saw the our Cape Canaveral gallery that we're so proud of. And let's take you, our watchers behind the scene that have never been in our American Space Museum. We're so proud of all this equipment. Is the real equipment that was in Launch Pad 14, 36, a few other in there. And what kind of memories did that bring back for you, sir?
the only thing I remember about 14 was about I forget, I was on night shift. And I remember one time going into work and walking in the blockhouse, and there's this lady in a bikini bathing suit sitting on one of the periscopes handles. And all of a sudden, like, I think I dropped my lunch bucket and broke my thermos. I'm not sure.
What color was that bikini?
They were shooting some, I forget what it was, but they were shooting some news thing. And all of a sudden, I wasn't really prepared for that, like, okay, here I am at work and boing, But it was a lot of fun working out there. I mean,
yeah, you were talking about, and I've heard this story before from the Convair people, that they sometimes would do things to turtles and armadillos.
Oh, yeah.
All in fun and harmless.
Oh, yeah.
What would you do to them?
Well, the turtles, our hard hats were white with a black stripe down the middle, so we got a bunch of turtles and painted them white and put a black stripe down them. But it was all kind of, I remember with Lockheed, our test director, because I kept going back to the Atlas. In other words, when I was on the Atlas, and then I was with Lockheed on the Agena, okay, we're still launching the Agena on the Atlas. Went to Mercury, okay, they're launching the Mercury is on the Atlas, so I kept coming back to Complex 14 with different companies, But I remember our Lockheed director one time was, they came out with a thing that everybody had to have a shirt and tie on for the launch.
Okay.
And I remember our test director showed up in bib overalls, the shirt and tie, and he was my hero from then on.
Oh, is that right? He was a little bit of a radical. He didn't. What you wore didn't matter how the rocket flew, huh?
It was really a great place to work. It was.
Well, we love your enthusiasm. We're going to look at a couple of these rockets. I wanted to show our Stay Curious faithful here and you newcomers what this launch complex looks like. The reel-to-reel on the right, I tell people today that's one of the world's first external hard drives. And there's some batteries on the top there and all kinds of consoles for everything you could imagine. There is the Atlas rocket with John Glenn's famous launch on February 20th, 1962. Though you weren't part of that mission per se, you certainly had to be somewhere around there when you saw that.
Oh, yeah.
What did you think of that?
It was, I would say that was one of when they first launched the first man,
Alan Shepard.
I think that was where the whole business changed. It was a different ball game. So, I think that first Atlas or first man launch was kind of a keystone point of the.
Absolutely. There's but here's some more of the things in our gallery there that we're so proud of. Those of you that hadn't seen it, there's the center there by your left side is the destruct system panel that if they had to blow up a rocket, pyrotechnics were a big part of these rockets.
Very technical, yeah. It's, well, I got a picture. That's that one picture I got in the wall. I think I was running the destruct console there for the.
Oh, really? You've run the destruct console?
That was for the Agena type on the Atlas. Yeah.
There's we're so proud to have one of the world's only configuration
sequencer.
Yeah, sequencers, Marty. Thank you I was blanking out there. Sequencers. Up at the top there is where all of these controls and that wires is put in, like a an old telephone board that you see on Andy Griffith's sort of thing. And the tape printed out on the left there some of the technicians come in and said they could put a protractor up to there. Yeah. A protractor knew where their squiggly lines were and could tell if the engine performed right and so forth, right?
It's some of that stuff was so weird that you hear about it, you figure, no, that couldn't have happened. Then you figure, yeah, I guess it could have happened.
One thing we talk about is there's no electric circuitry here. There's no transistors. This is what we call a step motor. You're very familiar with this type of system, correct?
Yeah. There was so many different systems out there. I think most of the stuff I was working on was not so much in the blockhouse as it was actually on the bird itself. Transistors and systems and stuff like that.
We're going to see some pictures up close there. Some of on the Centaur mostly, right? Yeah. Half man, half horse. The Centaur.
Yeah, the Centaur was our competition from the Atlas. They went from the Atlas and then they built the Centaur. So.
Something I heard looking at this. A couple old timers have told me that in the 1950s, if you could fix a radio, a jukebox, or do anything about TVs in the late 50s, NASA or a contractor would snatch you up like that. And that pinball machines were really complicated.
Oh yeah, it was very. There was no local people to draw people from here in the 50s. In other words, most of the people that were local hired would probably come from Pratt Whitney down in West Palm or something like that, but there was no aircraft industry or anything like that in this area. And so it was real. I know when I came down, they thought they were trying to ask me, if I just came down and rehired in, and I was like a piece of gold or something. At first they thought I must have got fired or something. Why am I here? Did you ever work on the Atlas when you were at Convery? I said, yeah, that was assembly line. Oh, okay. But there weren't really very many local people that you could draw on. Other places, like if you go to California, you could find, half the people in California work in the aircraft business.
There you go.
You could find all kind of people, but here all of a sudden, like.
You showed up like a gold nugget, you're saying here that they want to.
It's one friend of mine down at the museum that graduated here in the class of 40 in Titusville. And he said you had 3 choices when you graduated. You could pick oranges or catch mullet or get on the bus and go to Jacksonville. That was your choice.
Pick oranges, catch mullet, or go up to Jacksonville.
Yeah, catch the next Greyhound bus out. And it was.
And then the Rocket Ranch was created.
And it was a big jolt for the local people too. I mean, it was all of a sudden.
Talk about what that's like in famous places that. How was the food at Bernard's Surf? And people talk about the Mousetrap. Yeah. And Satellite Bar. All this springing up.
Well, everything was at Cocoa Beach, really. And I think when I went to work for Convair, I had to come back the next day and fill out some papers because I left the wife in Jacksonville. And when I came down and I finished the paperwork, and I left, and the first day I left, I went across the 520 Causeway, and it was just solid traffic, just standing still. And when I went in the next day, I asked the gal, if there's any other way to get in here besides going to Cocoa, and she said, yeah, I think there's a north gate if you go north, that you could go up to a place called Titusville. So I went north to Titusville and never did look for any. I just bought a house in Titusville, stayed there. There's no traffic. Huh. Yeah, the old North Gate used to be a guy there with a porta potty and a old hog fence across there. He'd cross the road, and that was about it.
Wow.
Guard.
And 40, 50 years later, what do you think? How the Space Coast is now thought about around the world?
Oh yeah, it's like one of the 7 wonders of the world practically now.
I like that. I like that. We're enjoying this conversation with Mr. Bill Blackwell. He was an instrumentation technician in the good old days at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. And all of these launch pads are being repurposed, Bill, to the new space rocket renaissance, we call it. What do you think about what's been happening out there with these private companies, SpaceX
Well,
and so
I think
forth?
that was one thing I liked about Lockheed was Lockheed built a missile under contract, and the bottom line was, okay, it works type. And in other words, you got Navy inspection there while you're doing it, but the Navy isn't building a missile. Well, they aren't. They do, the ones that go and actually go into combat, but up at Charleston. But down here, everything was done. The contractor was on his own type, more or less, and the Navy was supervising it. Where it wasn't like NASA, where the government is actually involved with the construction type. And it seems now, I think it works a lot better that you got SpaceX and stuff, because they're kind of working that way.
Yeah, they
In
are.
other words, so okay, we'll build it. We'll let you know. Now you come check it out and see if it's okay type. And I think it's working out a lot better, I think. And the people you've got people that are here that are living here permanently, where before you were always on a program, and okay, when that program was, and luckily the Polaris program stayed here forever. I mean, it's still out there.
We're going to
So-
see some pictures of that. I'm going to show
Yeah.
some of these rockets we talk about. You're at your daughter's house here in Titusville. One of them noisy rockets goes off at 7:30 in the morning, like last Friday.
Yeah.
You go out and look at it. What do you think? You think I own
I
a
hate
piece
to
of
admit
that?
it,
Or-
but I never go outside and look at it.
Oh, you
I-
don't? Oh, okay. Well, I'm being presumptuous there. You're like Marty. He's seen the Saturn V's and all the shuttles. Why do I want to see that little?
I sit and watch it
kidding.
until it goes on TV. Then I go out and look at it and say, okay, there it goes. But it's it is if you're involved with it and you realize what's really happening, I think most people don't really realize all that goes into one of those things when they light it off. I mean, how many millions of parts and stuff that's all got to work at the same time, same place. And I remember the kids, we used to try to get them to go out and look, and do we have to? Like, there's another missile going, and
Well, we've gone from 4 or 5 or luckily 10 missiles a year to now
it
30
was
a month or 15,
it
20
was
a month. It's
very
something.
few. In other words, it was a big, long, drawn out. And now you got SpaceX is zapping them up there all the time, every other time you turn around. So.
Do you feel like humanity is leaving this earth to take the baby steps to go somewhere else, or what?
I don't know. That's kind of above my pay grade,
Okay. Well, let's look at what is your
It
pay
is past
grade
my
here.
five.
I'm just waxing a little too nostalgic and maybe romantic here, like I always do. But here's a rocket that you worked on. This was, I'll bet you were there. This is the Thor Agena on June 13th, 1962.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
went to
that
work
was
with Lockheed in
Discover.
60.
The payload was a series. There was a series of satellites called Discover, like Explorer. So that's I didn't get how tall that is. Is that, you remember kind of how tall it was?
I forget. It wasn't nearly as big as an Atlas, but it was
Only about 80 feet tall or something like that.
something like
isn't it?
that. Yeah.
And there's the liftoff of one. This one, I'll bet you were at November 20th, 1959. November 59. And
No, because I went to work for Lockheed in
Okay.
March of '60. Yeah.
But you saw this very similar lot.
Oh, yeah, probably.
I didn't look up what the fuel was. It was at that RP kerosene with liquid oxygen.
Yeah, the Thor was liquid. Yeah, the Polaris was the first solid I worked on.
Okay, yeah. Now here's that's at the factory. A picture I just thought. That is an Agena rocket, the second
Yeah.
stage. So important to the Atlas Agena program. The Agena rocket placed the spacecraft 350 satellites in orbit.
Yeah.
And we were talking about one mission that you liked working on. This one, Ranger.
Yeah, that was the first one to make it to the moon there. The Agena was the first missile they had that had restart capability. In other words, it was like it is now, where you put something in orbit, get it lined up just right, and then fire it again type.
Does that look familiar to you?
Oh yes, there.
Gina rocket, which was also
Yeah.
used as a target vehicle for the Gemini program.
Yeah,
A little longer configuration of it, but that could be a Ranger payload on top of it there. Not
Yeah.
sure what the payload is here.
Yeah.
But you see the technicians there at midway. There, one man on the right above your head has his arm on one of the poles there, which that would be me. I would never let my arm off of anything. I'm so scared of heights. Not a good thing when you're a rocket guy, is it? You remember being up there in those heights?
Yeah, it most of the time. Well, anytime you're even close to anywhere that you could fall, you'd have to have a safety belt on. So that still, you didn't want to fall even if you had a safety belt.
Yeah.
'Cause
Not
it
like
kind of gave you a sore middle there.
exactly. But very important stage, so important that it was thought about in 1972 it would go on a space shuttle. Look at that art from 1972, Marty. 4 engines, a little bit of a detail on it that didn't end up being on the space shuttle, but the white is the Atlas payload rocket in the payload bay they were going to use to send Galileo to Jupiter and Magellan to Venus, and no astronaut wanted to fly with that liquid fuel in that payload bay there. But what do you think about our 30-year legacy of the shuttle era?
Well, I'll tell you, it is. It's really amazing when you think back that you were able to have, that you were here to watch it. It's because it's just like being part of history or being able to watch it happen. I don't think I could have found a more interesting job anywhere than here, but it was just an exciting job all around. I mean, every day was something different.
Well, we're glad you're sharing it with us here. Ask about calling home to see the birds.
Stars.
The
Stars?
He would say it's a good night to go out to see the stars.
But stars, not the birds. You used to call home.
To say it's a good
Oh,
night.
yeah. That would have been illegal, Cindy. I don't think. No, you'd always have some excuse where you could call home.
Uh-huh.
And say let the dog out or go look at the stars or do something and let the wife know that okay, we're fixing to have a launch. You take the kids out in the yard.
Oh, okay. So the tip off to the family to watch a launch was you would call up and say something like, "Did you get the gallon? Did you get milk at the grocery store?"
Yeah,
or something
or,
like that.
I mean, everybody would have some kind of little code that they'd call home with. Like,
Wow,
okay, let me go
that's
call the wife.
interesting, okay. Well, that's pretty cool. Did you have a good balance of night launches and day launches, or any reason that you wanted to launch in the day?
Yeah, because you never when they'd start a countdown especially on the first Atlas, you never knew whether it was going to go today or tomorrow. It was you might have 10 different holes during your count, so it's.
Well, part of the and you experienced a lot of failures. But as we were talking in the Cape Canaveral gallery, I didn't bring that picture in with me. Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. This is a famous picture we have in our gallery. This is an Atlas blowing up on the pad on April 4th or April 7th, 1962. April 62, February 20th, 62, John Glenn orbited the Earth on this Atlas rocket like that. And Scott Carpenter was next up in May, so he saw this blow up on the launch pad, and then he got on the next one. But as it says here, a couple parts rubbed together in the sustainer pump, and they knew what happened and fixed it.
Oh, there were so many weird, because the first Atlases, nobody knew what was going to happen. I mean, they'd fire it, let's see if we can get to 10,000 feet before it blows up this time or something, And,
yeah, right.
And the Atlas was bad because it was a balloon. It had no airframe. It was just a big tank.
It was just like a long balloon.
Yeah, we had to keep it under
pressure
tension.
I was fascinated by that.
And when it'd blow up, they'd pass the word out there to take cover because they'd have all these little bits of stainless steel floating down, So,
any of that in your private collection of memorabilia? Did you ever take things like that?
No, you never thought about stuff like that. Like, oh, it's trash. Throw it in the trash for the rest of it. But it was.
today we look at it as artifacts of
Oh
the
yeah,
beginning of our
the only
our
thing I
space
kept
age.
from out there when we were picking up parts, that's where I got that Canaveral rose, out where the old lighthouse used to be before they moved it.
Uh-huh.
There was a a couple of roses growing out there, and I took a clipping of one and gave it to this one gal that was always growing plants there, one of the secretaries. And when we went to Kwajalein, when we came back, uh, she said, I still got that rose growing, that clipping. He says, you want it? And I took it. And I've made clippings. I got them all over town. I gave some to the lighthouse deal.
Huh.
But and it's an old, I mean, it had been growing wild for like, what, 80 years or something out there, you know. And there's some growing at the entrance to Windover Farms now that I stuck out there. But it was,
You propagated roses out there.
yeah,
How
it was,
cool is
we
that?
called it the Canaveral Rose. I don't know what it was really, but
That's it. We're enjoying our conversation with National Treasure here, Bill Blackwell, an instrumentation technician out here in the good old days of starting this beautiful space age here on our space coast. You want to mention? Oh, I wanted to mention your Polaris program. Before I jump to that, well, I got the note here. You've been active with the North Brevard Museum.
yeah.
That's just a couple blocks away, one of our partners in the museums of Brevard. What other things have you been involved in outside of your work?
Well, when I retired, we had got a motor home and did a lot of traveling, and basically that and my shop and stuff kept me pretty well busy.
Woodworking shop.
Yeah,
you were telling me
woodworking
about.
shop
This guy's apparently a good master woodworker. You said you had a gunsmith shop,
Yeah,
so
I
you
used to run.
you know how to
fix
make
guns.
barrels straight. Apparently.
Oh yeah, that's playing with that. And
How about your family? How many children? Where'd you meet
I've
your
got
wife and
I've
all
got
that?
3 children, and then I had 5 grandchildren. 7 great grandchildren? Hey, I got it right. See,
All right.
so yeah, we're spread all over the country here. I lost about 2 sons, but I've still got my daughter here,
God
and
bless
I
you.
got 2 grandkids that live here in town, and all the rest are up in Chicago, New York, Ohio, all over.
Well, you are very alert, and I enjoy hearing these stories from you. You know, this is what we do at the American Space Museum. Tell your friends out there that these national treasures that worked in the early days of our space program, truly the Space X's and Blue Origins are standing on the shoulders of these giants. And that's why we love giving you time to talk about this. Let's look at the important top secret program that you spent a lot of time with. That's a Polaris rocket, folks. It's only about 20 feet tall, isn't it?
Well, it was the Polaris was. Oh, I forget exactly what the length of it was, but
That's a bigger
it
one
was
there.
2-stage, and then we went from the Polaris into the. It evolved into the Trident and the Poseidon and that stuff. And the one they've got now, like the first one was just a single warhead, and now you got multiple warheads. And
There's the actual launch of one off the HMS Revenge, is what it
Yeah.
says on there.
now
This
that would
is
be one of
important to our national security very
well, now
much.
this is a Brit. That would be a Brit sub.
Okay.
Yeah, the Revenge.
Revenge,
was,
okay. That's a Polaris, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. At least I got that part right.
The Brits were over here. They had a regular program too.
Oh, so you helped them with their results?
Yeah, I wasn't actually on it. They were in the same facility, but they were.
Well, this is still an active program and a very important part of our defense system in some
Oh
ways.
yeah,
and so
they're
forth.
still going out there.
Solid rockets, though, right?
It's it's part of the triad there. So it's
Uh-huh.
the
Let's see here. I was looking at some of my notes here. We've really enjoyed talking with you here today. I have a lot. Marty, is there anything that you thought of you wanted to ask Mr. Blackwell?
I can't think of anything.
well, we had one other one thrown in the middle of the Polaris. We went out to Kwajalein on the whole program, and that was the first when we the whole missile shot down it was the first time they shot down a reentry body.
Is that right? What year was that?
well,
recollect?
Kwajalein, they've always been firing missiles at it. In other words, it's kind of, in other words, they, like our program, they fired a missile from Vandenberg, and we were supposed to shoot it down.
Uh-huh.
And we were out there took us about 3 years to do it, but the Kwajalein they've had a lot of programs out there, mainly because they could land a warhead in the lagoon out there and
What town was
track
that?
it right in. This was 80 to 84, 81, 84.
But what part of the country were you?
Kwajalein in the Kwajalein Atoll in the South Pacific.
Kwajalein Atoll in the South Pacific. Wow.
Well, and actually, it's kind of weird because the access stand from the Polaris, we rolled it down to the port, and they loaded it on this giant ship and took it over to Kwajalein. So when we got to Kwajalein, here our old access stand was still sitting there. You know, it was kind of weird. You're in the middle of the Pacific, you get on the elevator and it says the call service, call 321 so and so or something. You know, like
Elevator. That's interesting. That is cool there, huh? Well, we really enjoyed talking to you, sir. Bill Blackwell here, really a national treasure, some great stories on there. Is there something you'd like to share that we haven't brought up as we end our little conversation here?
not that I could do on camera.
Okay. We'll turn that off camera. Well, I want you to have a rocket hobo patch, okay?
Ooh.
Our friend Ozzy Osbourne was the true rocket hobo, did launches out there, conducted a talking about
Thank
it
you.
at the Spaceview Park. He passed away this summer, and we honor him with that. And you certainly, sir, are a rocket hobo with all that you've seen out there. Although hobo's not a terminology people remember what that is too much. It's quarter way through the 21st century, but you and I do. So,
Yep.
but thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having
and
me.
thank you for making us available to you and your daughter Cindy Parker. So glad that
Yeah.
she's here, a Titusville native, and so we wish you continued good health. All
Well,
right,
thank you.
and
thank you
enjoy
so
the next
much.
rocket launch. You're welcome. Look up there as we tell everybody. We hope that you enjoyed this
Yeah.
edition of Stay Curious. Tell your friends that not only do we do space news and space history, but we're the only place out there interviewing what we call these legends of our birth of the rocket era here on our eastern space coast of Florida. So glad to have you here,
Well,
sir.
I'm so glad you're doing this.
Well, thank you very much, and you stay healthy. We'll have you back again. Until next time, I'm Marquette saying we can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us.